Hey there, geeks and geekettes and fans of comics everywhere, and just generally anyone who's a pop culture nerd. Welcome to Ask Chuck Dixon, episode number 76. It's Wednesday morning, and let's get right to it. If you want to reach me, if you want to ask me a question, you can just send it to brunobookstore@gmail.com. You can send me anything. You want a piece of artwork you've done, or anything like that, a suggestion, criticism, praise. Want to tell me directly to just go to hell and stay there? Go to brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most direct way, the most reliable way to reach me if you want to participate in this little show. So let's get to the first question. Kenny Todd was wondering if you could tell us some Jim Aparo stories. I've been a fan and have had a Facebook page dedicated to his work for many years now, and it's well deserved. I know a lot about him professionally, but little about him behind the scenes. I think he was an incredible artist. When his Batman threw a punch, it looked like it was in motion, much like Kirby, in my opinion. Yeah, Jim was a hell of a talent, which you can see just by looking at his artwork. And one of the more iconic, well-recognized Batman artists, and certainly one of the most prolific. I would think that Jim drew more Batman than anybody ever. He had a really long run on Brave and Bold. I used to dig Brave and Bold a lot when I was a kid, even into my adulthood, the entire run. And Jim was always there. And obviously he was once he left Charlton Comics, he was a rock at DC. I mean, he was a workhorse. He was there month in and month out, producing top drawer work. Just the consummate pro, and that's obvious from just looking at the pages. But what was he like behind the scenes? Like most of the really talented artists in comics, he was utterly self-effacing. He didn't know how to handle compliments. He was very gracious about it, but a little embarrassed. He knew that people admired his work and everything, but never let that go to his head. He enjoyed the work. He enjoyed doing it. He enjoyed honing his craft and improving himself. He liked the stories. And the other thing he loved was his grandkids. So, he would either talk about comics, or he would talk about his grandkids, or he was a big fan of the Seinfeld show. He could quote it. He liked that show a lot, and he was a old school comic professional. 5 o'clock, he laid that pencil or that brush down. And that was it. He didn't think about comics again. He went and had a life. Unlike a lot of us, we're sort of comic books 24/7 all the time. Our whole life is consumed with it. But Jim came from, a more workaday world. And I got to work with him quite a bit. A number of inventory stories which never saw the light of day. They're sitting in a moldy old drawer somewhere. Probably got left behind in New York when DC moved. But the time I remember most with Jim was at a San Diego Comic Con, where almost the entire Nightfall crew went out there. DC covered the cost because Nightfall had made them a lot of money, and they flew everybody out to San Diego. We had a big Nightfall panel, and Jim was there. It was rare for Jim to go to a convention, even more rare for him to sit on a panel. And he didn't have a lot to say because he was not a guy to talk about himself. It was just the most friendly, sweetest guy you'd ever want to meet, but he wasn't into talking about himself. So he wasn't a performer like a lot of people are on panels, and God bless him. If you're good at doing panels, that's great. Jim was reticent and mostly didn't talk at all. And at one point, Denny was moderating it, and he called on somebody who raised their hand in the audience, and the guy stands up and he says, I don't have a question. I just want to thank Mr. Aparo for all the years of terrific work in comics. And it was a standing O. And this was a packed hall. And everybody stood up. It's like 1,000 people standing up, cheering, applauding. And it went on and on and on. And Jim just teared up. He was really, really moved up. Well, everybody on the panel teared up. But Jim was just like doubled over. Because, you know, he never thought about that kind of stuff when he was working. He didn't think about adulation or fandom. His goal was not to sit behind a table and lord it over the fans. He just was happy doing the work, and I think the respect of his peers was the most important thing to him. So, you know, he was very much overcome. And then later that evening, Jim was hanging out at the hotel bar with me and Graham Nolan and a couple of other people. Maybe Jim Ballant was there. There was a bunch of people. We're just hanging out. We're just talking. And Archie Goodwin comes up to us in the bar. He says, Jim, you had a presentation you were supposed to be at tonight. And Jim said, I didn't feel like doing it. I just wanted to hang out with my friends. And boy, Graham and I were like, whoa, we're Jim Aparo's friends. He just referred to us, you know. He took my hand and called me friend. So that was a highlight for us. And then Archie says, yeah, but the presentation was to give you this award. And Archie hands Jim Aparo his Lifetime Achievement Inkpot Award, which was supposed to be given to him at a big ceremony. But they usually give you, in fairness, when they give you the Inkpot Award, it's usually a surprise. I know when I got mine, I was not expecting it. I thought I was just on a panel. So Jim didn't know he was going to get an award. He would never have been that rude. But he just thought, oh, it's another panel. I don't really like doing them. I'm just going to hang out at the hotel, you know, over a beer and talk to my pals. So Archie was always funny. He made a big deal out of presenting to him at the bar, like it was this was the official presentation. And once again, Jim was moved. You know, he put the little statuette up on the bar, and you know, we all toasted it and toasted him, and wonderful time. But yeah, I just always had a great time with him. He came to a couple of Bat Summits, and again didn't have a whole lot to say because he didn't think. I think he didn't even know why he was there, but he enjoyed the free meals and stuff like that. But you know, he did have important things to say. He just didn't think they were important, and loved hanging out with him. I cherish every memory of every moment I ever spent with Jim. He was just a terrific guy. So hats off to Jim Aparo. Mr. Entertainment asks, what are your favorite decades for the Batman characters? Well, the 90s would be good for me because that's when I wrote a lot of Batman. So that's a personal favorite because I was, you know, the bulk of my income and the vast majority of my time was consumed with Batman. I to the point where I probably could have claimed citizenship in Gotham City. But as a fan, which I think is what you're asking, 70s Batman was a big time for me. I like the older 50s Batman stories, but in the 70s when Denny O'Neil and Frank Robbins, who never gets enough credit, Denny O'Neil and Frank Robbins sort of rebooted, a soft reboot of Batman to return him to his roots. And there was a lot of excellent stuff being done in that time. And it was very revolutionary. It was pulling Batman away from the 1966 TV show, which was, you know, most people associated him with that. And returning Batman to his glory, returning Batman to what he was always meant to be. And in the 70s, my absolute favorite run on any Batman comic, unfortunately it was a short run, was Archie Goodwin came to DC and he took over editorship of Detective Comics. And he didn't do that many issues. And it was when DC had moved to these 60-cent 100-pagers. And Archie, I don't know if Archie knew he wasn't going to be on the title long, but what he did was he did a whole series of standalone issues. And everyone was drawn by a different artist. And basically, I think it was like, this is my wish list for Detective Comics. If I ever got to do Detective Comics, this is what I would do. And he didn't, I think he wrote a couple of them, but he didn't write them all. And he hired, top people to write and draw. He had Neil Adams, Sal Amendola, Jim Aparo did some, Alex Toth. And the main backup in Detective Comics, which began and ended with Archie's run, was Manhunter by him and Walt Simonson, which they did a lot of groundbreaking, experimental type storytelling. It was a big sensation at the time among fans, this Manhunter series. And because they were 100 pagers, and at that time DC Comics, their whole lineup for a few months there was 100 pagers, because they were trying to get that price point up to 60. They were going up from 25 cents to 60 cents in order to maintain their place on the newsstand. So the back of the books had to be filled with reprint material. And even that was cool because it was Archie picking it. So he was picking Green Lantern stories that had been drawn by Alex Toth. He was Eclipso as well by Alex Toth. Some really good stuff from the Fawcett and Quality comics, which we hadn't seen a lot of, and some Primo Silver Age and Plastic Man. I love Plastic Man, and so did Archie. And so it was my favorite comic at the time because the lead features were so terrific. They were these great, punchy Batman stories, and they were all different. Every month it was different. One would be a revenge story. One would have a supernatural flair to it. Another one would be a whodunit mystery. And they're great. And one of my favorite Batman stories of all time happens in this run. It's called Night of the Stalker. And it's the most simple, bare bones Batman story you can imagine. A violent bank robbery takes place in Gotham, and Batman pursues the bank robbers, and he will not give up. And it's everything about Batman that I love. The detective skills, as well as it's just his dogged determination, the indefatigability of Batman. And he just pursues these guys to the point where after a while you begin to feel sorry for them. Because Batman is not going to let them go. They are not going to escape. And so this was all during that run. So this like maybe 8-9 month run of Detective is absolutely, without a doubt, my favorite era of Batman. Damian Field, I was wondering how you feel about the Dune series, the novels by Herbert, the sequels by his son and Kevin J. Anderson, and the movie miniseries adaptations. Well, I don't feel anything about them, unfortunately. And I get asked this a lot by, I guess, Dune fans, so I may as well answer it. I can't keep ignoring you people. That's rude. I tried to read Dune back in the day. I read Lord of the Rings. I read a whole lot of real thick books. But I could not get through Dune. And I think the reason is I think there's two different kinds of science fiction fans. And I'm the other kind. I wanted action and shoot 'em up. And yeah, I like the sense of wonder stuff, and I like the crazy science stuff and the extrapolation of scientific theories and how they were dramatized. I love all that stuff. But what I never liked was books about the politics on other planets. It's kind of where the Star Wars prequels lose me. I mean, we're watching a movie about a Senate vote on another planet. I mean, who cares? And the machinations and intrigue and everything else is what I'd rather read about the Borgias. I'd rather read about this kind of stuff that actually really happened in the real world that I could relate to. The same reason I didn't care for Foundation by Isaac Asimov. That series, it has fans. People love it, and that's great if that's the kind of science fiction you like. Babylon 5 is another one. It just bored me to tears because I can't relate to this because it's never going to affect me. Because number one, it's made up. And even if it was really happening, it's taking place on a planet light years away. It's simply never going to... I mean, if the Martians... Well, not the Martians, but if extraterrestrials ever did land and try to conquer the Earth, I don't think we'd care about their primary season, We would just be worried about whether we were going to get our dog melted by a death ray. So yeah, if you like Dune, I can see it, it's tremendous imagery and everything else. I can see the attraction, and it's It's a densely populated world. It's a well thought out universe. I admit to all of that. It just doesn't interest me. I'm very sorry. Eric Valencia. Are all story arcs planned for a certain number of issues, or it is a wait and see how well they sell thing? Also, do you prefer single issue stories, or would you rather write arcs, which are harder to write? Well, standalone stories are the hardest to write because you've got an X number of pages. You're limited. There's not a lot of real estate, and it's got to, the old say, it's got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yeah, it does. It does. And it also, a single issue story creates a level of anticipation in the reader that maybe it's going to be something special because it takes place in continuity, but outside of the events going on in the series regularly. So it's just a standalone story. It can be read cold by anybody. You could never have read this comic before and enjoy this story. So there's a lot of things required of a standalone story that's not required of an arc. And so, to my mind anyway, if you're going to write a standalone story, you better sweat it. You better put the work in and make it memorable and make it a entertaining experience. And there's a lot of reasons for writing standalone stories. Perhaps you want to do a portrait issue. Perhaps you have a story that only needs 22 pages. Perhaps there's a needed gap in the continuity. You've got to either create a pause before or after a big crossover event or something like that, and you've only got one issue and you've got to do something with that issue. And some are editorially driven, and the editor will say, what if this happened, or why don't you've never done this kind of story, why don't you do this for one issue? And I'm like, and that's great. I like suggestions from editors. I welcome their input. A lot of times you hear, well, editors and writers, they're always at war. No, they're not, unless they would never have gotten along anyway. I mean, if you got two people that wouldn't have gotten along on a long car ride, they're certainly not going to be able to work well together as editor and writer. But, if you work with someone you have a rapport with, it's a partnership. It really is. It's not a boss-employee relationship. I never looked at it that way. I felt that I was in partnership with my editor, that he was part of the creative team. Just like the penciler and the inker and the letterer and the colorist. And we were all basically pulling an oar on the same boat, trying to do our best work. And and the idea was we all help each other get that done. I helped by always meeting my deadlines. But anyway, standalone stories are tougher to write. I mean, the shorter the story, the harder it is to write. If you had to write a story that was one page, you'd work harder on that than you would on a 3-issue arc. It's true. Maybe not as much time put in, but brain power and thinking. Now, as far as arcs go, arcs are easier, a lot easier, because you've got a lot of real estate. And the expectations with an arc are different than a single page story. You've got to tell a story. It's got to have a beginning, middle, and end. But where that middle, how long that middle is, and where the end comes, and is there a denouement, and is there a preface and a prelude, and there's a lot more to play with. It's more like a feature length film as opposed to a 30-minute episode. So there's room for error, is what I'm trying to say. In a single issue story, there's no room for error. You can't have dead scenes. You can't waste any space. You can't have tangents. But you can do that in a 5-issue arc, and readers expect it. They anticipate it. And there's just more room to play. Also, when you have a story that big, especially if you work well ahead of schedule, which I always did, you can always go back and play with things and move things around. Whereas with a single issue story, you've generally got a week or less to write it. And a lot of times they were rush stories. Single issue stories were rush because they were unanticipated in the general continuity of the book. Something would come up, it's like, we need an issue. The artist is running late. We made a mistake in where the crossover is going to land, and we need a single issue story to fill this gap, and we need it quick. And so there's no time for rewrites or playing or considering or fooling around with it anymore. So not only is it often harder work than an arc, there's time constraints. So you got to be on your A game all the way through it. With an arc, I believe I wrote this entire arc, Brotherhood of the Fist. I wrote the whole thing before any artist ever got a hold of it. So I could move things around and take suggestions from the editorial staff. And but generally, it's a 5-issue, 6-issue arc on a comic is it's a feature film. It's a action movie on paper, and it's just paced differently, and each issue leads into the next. You work harder on the last issue of an arc than on any other issue because you got to wrap everything up, and you got to have some sort of emotional catharsis and a satisfying ending. It's either satisfying because it's tragic or it's funny or it's super hyper dramatic or whatever, and you do want to end it. I don't like this new tradition of having these arcs that leave a cliffhanger at the end. That's not an arc. That's just more of a serialization. So I liked my arcs to be standalone, tell a complete story, and introduce all the characters just the way, I introduced, Robin and Nightwing and Green Arrow and Batman as if no one had ever read them before, and bring them in the story, put them into motion, and bring them to a solid, satisfying conclusion. And the thing is, with like a 5-issue arc or a 6-issue arc, you've got 4 or 5 chances. It's every issue doesn't have to be as strong as every other issue, if you know what I mean. You can delay action, you can delay reveals. There's a lot. There's a lot of moving parts, but it's still easier because it's like, well, I didn't get to this. I'll get to it next issue. Which obviously you can't do in a standalone. You can't put things off. You can't string a subplot along. Usually in a standalone there aren't any subplots. So, and then as to your question of do we wait and see how it sells? Well, that doesn't happen in comics. Our print and publication schedules are unforgiving. You can't wait to see how something sells. You've got to commit. So if it's going to be a 4-issue, 5-issue, 6-issue, 12-issue arc, you commit to all those issues. And if they don't sell well, you're in trouble. So when we did Nightfall, we committed to 2 years of continuity going in. Now, we adjusted a lot of it, some of it because of sales. But for the most part, we accomplished everything we wanted. But it was a big commitment. It was a long commitment. And no one knew, going into it, if it was going to succeed or not. But, that's comics. That's what you do. You can't adjust on a dime in comics because you're working on stuff that won't be seen for months by the public. Sometimes as much as 6 months. I've worked on stories that didn't get seen for a year. So there's no way to, adjust that because of sales. By the time you realize the sales are poor, the next issue's already at the printers. You can't call it back. Now, I know in recent years, particularly at DC, they tried to do some of that by constantly changing creative teams, trying to, figure out which way the wind was blowing. But, as you can see, for the most part, that was a disaster. And, they hurt sales by not having any continuity in the creative end of it, where, creative team would be on a book for 2 or 3 issues, get fired, and be replaced by somebody else. Often they were replaced before sales even came back. So, there might have been potential hits they had, but they ruined it by changing the creative team in midstream. It's just not a good idea. It's where commitment comes into it. You gotta figure out, we're gonna do this for the next 6 months. We're gonna do this for the next year, and we're committing to it. Batman's going to turn into a gorilla for 3 months, and it's going to be 3 months of Batman as a gorilla, and there's no way we're going to change it, and we're pulling the trigger on that one, and we'll see how the readers like it. And if they don't, we'll try something else. So there you go. Wild artists. I don't know if this is more than one person asking this question. what do the big two need to do to save their decline of popularity? And lastly, or secondly, what are your thoughts on Comicsgate? Do you think it's a useless movement that's overdoing it, or a necessary thing to wake up Marvel and DC? These questions are very much interrelated. So you got DC and you got Marvel. They're the big two. They're the big cats in the cage. They're the stars. They're the marquee. And they float all the boats. All of the comic industry goes up or down with the fortunes of DC or Marvel. That's just the way it is. I don't see it ever changing, particularly since DC and Marvel seem to be in some sort of a suicide pact with themselves to destroy American comics. I'm beginning to believe they're doing it intentionally. They just want, and I don't think in a year from now, DC or Marvel are going to exist as we see them today or as we ever remembered them. I think they're going to become a licensing house, and that's it. So if you've got the bucks to license and you're dying to do a elongated man graphic novel, you'll be able to license it and do it. I really think that's coming. It's been coming for a long time, but sales are putrid. Sales are terrible. And something's got to give. The parent companies can't keep carrying these comic book companies that simply don't deliver any kind of earnings. And I know in the new economy, as NPR always tells me, earnings don't matter, but they do. They do in the end. You got to pay people. You got to make enough money to pay everybody. Keep the lights on. So, what can they do to turn around? I honestly, at this point, I think it's too late. They've screwed the pooch on all of this stuff so much. They've chased away so many readers. At this point, if DC and Marvel said, well, we're going to go back to doing things the way we used to, at this point, would you believe them? Because they've certainly said it enough times. I mean, since, as the steam ran out of the Ultimates at Marvel, it seemed like every 3 months the companies would say, we're going to return to more traditional ways of doing comics. We're going to return, we're going to do a soft reboot and basically go back to the way we were doing business before. But it turned out never to be true. I think partly because they had chased away the talent or barred the talent from working that could have actually accomplished that could have returned them to greatness. I mean, there's rare exceptions. I mean, Dan Jurgens continues to do terrific work at DC, but that's a rare exception. For the most part, all of the contemporaries of Dan Jurgens they're not working in comics, or they're doing their own thing. This is where Comicsgate comes in, because what happened was, because Marvel and DC chased away 60-70% of their readership, and no new readers came in to replace them, because why would they? Comics aren't that interesting. They're not that engaging. They're not that attractive. And they feature characters that, for the most part, people couldn't even recognize anymore, because they've either been completely changed or altered in such a way that the general public no longer recognized them. So, kids going to see a Marvel or DC movie wanted a comic book like those characters that couldn't even find anything like those characters. So sales cratered, continue to crater, death spiral. But what happens to all those comic book readers? Those dead people like you, like me. We want to read comics. We don't want to stop just because they suck. So into that gap comes Comicsgate. And I don't even like Comicsgate as a term, because it started out as a pejorative. You're part of Comicsgate, like it's some conspiracy, like we all live in the same house. And I don't even know what Comicsgate is. I'm not even sure what Comicsgate means. I'm always included in Comicsgate. When they make a list of Comicsgate people, I'm always on it, often near the top, which is why I jokingly say I'm the Jesus of Comicsgate. I was the first. I was, blacklisted by the industry and, outed as a conservative, boo hiss. And so, I'm not even sure what Comicsgate is. It's, because, it's like this loose affiliation, and it's a very loose affiliation because a lot of Comicsgate people don't like each other. But what it is it's a bunch of successful pros and some amateurs who are now pro very much, who through crowdfunding or whatever other means created their own comics, did away with the gatekeepers, said, hey, we don't need the big two, and reached out to that underserved comic book audience that no longer read DC and Marvel. And DC and Marvel, their editorship and their creator people deeply resent this. And so they make it into something political. It's no accident that the majority of the Comicsgate people, or the majority of these new independent creators, tend to be conservative, because so many of them no longer work for the big two because they were blacklisted. So what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to go become greeters at Walmart, or they find a way to keep doing what it is they do best, which is create comics. And we know the names, Billy Tucci, Ethan Van Sciver, Graham Nolan, Richard Meyer. These guys have been incredibly successful, and there's others as well. And they have Brian Pulido. Brian Pulido is a rock star of crowdfunding, working outside the system. Well, of course, Brian Pulido has always worked outside the system. He's always found a way, and so that's what Comicsgate is. And I find it funny that some of the big critics of Comicsgate tried to do what the quote-unquote Comicsgate people were doing and fell flat on their faces because they didn't seem to understand it. They thought that they mistook it for a political movement. It's not really a movement, because it's not like we all got together in a, in a castle somewhere and say, well, you're going to do this and I'm going to do this and you're going to do, this just was organic. This was organic. This was people making their own efforts, figuring out how to do the comics they wanted to do, figuring out how to continue their careers, figuring out how to keep food on the table for their families, and also to serve their fans, the people who had supported them all these years and didn't want them to go away. I mean, you've got favorite comic book creators. I've got favorite comic book creators, and I want to see them keep creating. I want to see new comics from my favorite creators. And no matter what they have to do that, and I don't want DC and Marvel telling me that I can't see new comics by my favorite creators just because they don't want to work with them. So like I said, Comicsgate was a pejorative. It's an insult. But some of the Comicsgate people embraced it like, well, this is a badge of honor. I don't really see it that way. I just think it's a kind of a dumb term. I don't think it accurately describes what's going on. I see it more as an independent creator revolution, a creator-owned revolution. And it's not like they used to call the image guys revolutionaries. They were comic book revolutionaries. Yeah, but they started as multimillionaires. I mean, it's not like they risked anything to create Image because they had tons and tons of money from Marvel. I mean, they built Image off of Marvel royalty checks, and yes, they had to put that money out, but trust me, they weren't spending everything that was coming to them from Marvel. And then they had great success. So once they had great initial success, well, where was the risk? I mean, they weren't really comic book rebels. These people doing it on their own, like Brian Pulido, Ethan Van Sciver, Graham Nolan, and a lot of others, Billy Tucci, they're the rebels because they're spending their own sweat equity. I mean, when you start to do the crowdfunding thing, there's no money coming in. There's no money. You got to just do the work and hope that you can reach out to enough people to finance it. Reach out so you'll have enough money coming in that you can look your family in the eye around the dinner table. Instead of saying, yeah, well, Dad just can't pay the mortgage this month because Daddy wants to draw funny books. Nobody that I know wants to be in that position. So these guys learned how to do it. I mean, I'm good friends with Graham Nolan, and man, he figured it out. He broke the code. I mean, he's worked it out, and he's making a good living, doing terrific work at the peak of his powers, and he's doing what he wants to do. And he's never been happier. He's always been a happy guy, but he's never been happier than he is right now. He's utter, complete freedom. Now, if that's a conspiracy, sign me up. But nobody helped Graham. Nobody helped Ethan. Nobody said, hey, here's $1 million, start a comic book. This was all risk, real risk, time, effort, in a lot of cases, money. You can't start a crowdfunder with $0. You got to invest something. You got to pay your other creatives that are helping you. So, yeah, I object to the whole Comicsgate thing. Now, what am I doing in all of this? I don't like crowdfunding. I mean, I like crowdfunding, but I don't want to have to do it. I don't want to stuff envelopes and the daily promotions and the videos and all the rest. I just want to write comic books. Please, just let me do this. So I work with other people who are really good at crowdfunding. I'm doing something with Graham now. Just started a new project with Richard Meyer this week, and he and I have worked quite a bit together. And he does all the heavy lifting. Him and Graham do the heavy lifting on the crowdfunding. And a lot of my efforts going into at archaven.com, ArcTunes, as I've discussed here many times before. And it's a free digital comics platform. This isn't the commercial, by the way, so don't tune out here. There's more questions coming. I've been doing a lot of work at ArcTunes, and well, by the time you see this, we'll be at over 2 million views. And we just started a few months ago. So this has been a huge success, and will get bigger. It's growing exponentially as we bring on new independent creators, and they bring their fan base along with them. So you should check it out. This is Comicsgate, for lack of a better term. This is the creator-owned creator revolution happening here as well, except digitally. And most of our stuff is not crowdfunded. It's supported through Patreon or subscribers or through other means. But it's new comics. It's new episodes every week. It's free. It's high res. You can read it on any device. Maybe by the time you're watching this, the phone app will have been finished and out there. And but like I said, you can read these comics on your big screen in your family room. So there you go. And as far as waking up Marvel and DC, let them sleep. Let them stay asleep. John Harrell, are tropes good or bad? How about cliches? Would you consider cliches to be tropes that have become overused? I always think cliches and tropes are kind of the same thing. I don't know. I don't know if there's a degree in which one's more hackneyed than the other. Are all cliches bad and should be avoided unless they're given a twist? How can a writer create a story or use a trope without it being a cliche? Well, you have to be aware of what a trope or a cliche is. And we've all seen them. I mean, come on, look at this one. Who's not tired of this? I'm going to look cool walking away from a blast. No, you're going to get knocked on your ass by that blast because there's a concussive wave coming from it. If you knew anything about explosives, nobody walks away looking cool from a blast. You get thrown off your feet, even Wolverine. We've all seen this one. The killer, he's dead. We all know he's not dead. It's not a surprise anymore. It's boring. Right? When it happened in Halloween, the first movie, yeah, it was a new thing, but it's been overused to death. Nobody's ever dead in a movie. So, especially the bad guy. The bad guy always gets 5 or 6 more tries to kill you. And have you ever seen a movie or TV show where the kids weren't late for the school bus? This one's so stupid because, okay, I never packed my kids off in a school bus, and I never took the school bus. But I imagine that if you're eating breakfast and not quite dressed, and you hear the school bus pull up to your door, you're not going to make it. I don't care how much mom is screaming and yelling and spouting expository dialogue. As she gets you dressed and you're taking that bite of that last piece of toast and race out, that school bus is going to be gone by the time you get to the end of the walk. And what school bus stops at every door? And I know kids that took school bus to school when I was a kid. And you went to the bus stop, You didn't wait till you heard the air brakes outside your front door. So that's one to avoid. The other one is the new way to get the dad or mom in an action story to make them relatable is that they're going to miss soccer practice or they're going to miss the dance recital. It's like, oh God, leave it alone. It's just so stupid. Another one I hate is on all these crime shows when the cops come to interview a witness or a suspect and they're at their job. They're they're gutting a pig at a slaughterhouse, or they're rearranging greeting cards on a shelf, or they're wrapping gifts or whatever they're doing. They don't stop doing what they're doing while the cops talk to them. That makes me nuts. That would never happen in real life. I mean, the cops come and say, we want to talk to you about that murder you saw last night. You stop making a Subway sandwich and talk to the cops. You say, Doris, could you finish this sandwich for me? The police want to talk to me about a murder. No, on these shows, you just keep making the sandwich while they, yeah, that's right. Yeah, they blew his head off. I saw everything. And you're still doing whatever your job is. It's ridiculous. Why do they do that? I mean, isn't anybody in the writer's room and said, look, how tired is this? I mean, don't the actors go, I've done this scene a million times, literally on the Law and Order shows. Some of these guys probably have done it a million times. Why are we doing this scene the same way? Why doesn't the guy, stop wrapping the fish long enough to talk to us? It's not a long scene. So, that one makes me particularly nuts. Another one I hate is what I call, and I may borrow this from someone, the Doris Day parking spot. We have to get to City Hall or we have to get to the courthouse, by such and such a time. And they always find a parking space right out front. First of all, have you ever seen a parking space in front of a courthouse? I never have. But for some reason, Midtown Manhattan, middle of the day, they're able to pull up in front of the courthouse, park the car, and get out. And if they're going to a store, they're always able to park right in front of that store. That never happens to anybody ever. And my question is, what is the point of even that scene? Every time I see it in a movie or TV show, it's an utterly pointless scene. Why don't you just show them walking into the courthouse? Why do we have to know where they parked? What was the point of all of that? So that's the important thing, is to know what a cliche is and just not do it. Just don't go there. Just don't. Don't rely on it. Now, because, you don't want this to happen. And I think this is happening more and more often as we're bombarded. We're assaulted with entertainment through streaming and all the rest of it. We're seeing this crap play out over and over and over again. And it's like, did I actually see this show before, but it was with a different cast? Because it's all the same stuff. So, and tropes, I guess, what is a trope? It's the overall story type. Those are certainly overused. If you ever watch Netflix or Amazon, they're streaming. There's one story they love, and it's the retired cop or injured cop or retiring doctor or whatever who has to return from the big city to their hometown. And it's always a series. And they get to their hometown and they find out they really didn't know about the place that they were raised in. There's all these deep, dark secrets. Their relatives all turn out to be cannibals or something. And they turn these out, like sausages on the streaming services. Now, some cliches are welcome. They're like mashed potatoes and gravy. If you like Westerns, if you really like Westerns, you're into the nuances of Westerns. People that aren't into Westerns think every Western is the same. And maybe they are to a certain extent. There was an Italian producer once who said he liked Westerns. They were his favorite movie. Because if he fell asleep in the middle, when he woke up, he still knew what was going on. So for Western fans, it's all about the nuances. But we want that gunfight. We've got to have that gunfight. It's an integral part of it. It's not a cliche. It's just part of the structure of the story. And Western stories are immortal and, iconic and there's not a lot you can do to play with them. Before they stop being a Western and just become a period drama set in the West. So, it's gotta have that gunfight, particularly at the end. There's only one great Western, Warlock. It does not have a gunfight at the end. And the whole point of the movie is that there's no gunfight at the end, so it works. Now, how do you avoid a cliche? Just don't go there. We all remember the scene in Raiders where they're obviously setting up for a bullwhip versus sword fight between Indy and this dude in a turban. And Indy's just had enough. He just shoots the guy. Now, legend has it, this was not improv, but it was set up because Harrison Ford was so sick with dysentery, they couldn't keep filming. And they needed to get this stuff into the can. They needed to finish this sequence in North Africa, in Tunisia, so they could move on to other locations and to do the rest of the film. So they had to finish filming that day. They couldn't keep going over time. And, Harrison Ford suggested, well, why don't I just shoot the guy? I mean, instead of spending the next 4 days filming this fight scene, why don't I just shoot the guy? Then we can all, go back to Pinewood and do the interiors, in air conditioning. So that's what they did. And I don't know if you saw this movie when it came out. I did. I saw it a couple of times at theaters, and the audience loved this scene. They simply loved this scene because it threw away a cliche, because there's a certain point where the good guy and the bad guy show up to fight, and sometimes it can get tiresome because, like, we've seen this before. I mean, Indy's going to win in the end. Let's just cut to that, and they did. We'd already and Raiders had so many good fights, you really didn't need another one. So here's a cliche or trope, or whatever you want to call it, that they just didn't participate in. They just avoided it. And I think that's what you got to do. You got to learn what they are and not do them. And I mean, in my most recent novel, it's not Levon's Hunt. Levon's Hunt is out now. The most recent one I completed is called Levon's Prey, and my main nitpicker in chief, Mike Hutchison, he nitpicked it for me. It's what I call it when he looks for typos. He read it and he said he liked it because there's a character in Levon's Prey who is this irredeemable, unpleasant, nasty, racist kind of guy. I mean, he's just not. There's nothing good about this guy. And Hutch read it, and he said it was his favorite part of the novel was with this character because he says, I hated him. I didn't like him. He was despicable. But wow, he was a great detective. Because basically this character is hunting for Levon. And when he said that, it's like, wow, I sidestepped a cliche, because I took the racist, hateful, horrible character, but I gave him one redeemable feature. He wasn't stupid. He was a good detective. I mean, he finds Levon. Nobody else can. I mean, we had how many? 10 books. The FBI couldn't figure him out, but this guy figures out Levon, figures out how to find him. Of course, that's the beginning of this guy's problems. But I didn't think about that when I was writing it. I didn't intend for that to be an aspect of his character. I mean, needed somebody to hunt Levon. I needed them to be a creep. But I really didn't think about, here's this duality in this character, that this horrible character, there's actually something to admire, which is what I always say. There should be something to admire in every villain and something to disdain in every hero. It's what makes them, it's the easiest way to make the characters interesting and well-rounded. So that was kind of an interesting aspect that, I guess I've been doing this long enough. I've begun to sidestep cliches and avoid them without really even thinking about it. But the most important thing, there's one question. If you're a writer or any kind of creative, there's a question you have to ask yourself, and you have to ask yourself all day long. If you're working at writing or doing whatever, you have to ask yourself this question constantly, dozens of times a day. as you're working. And that question is there a better way to say this? It's not like Jeopardy. Sometimes you don't want to go with your first response because your first response is going to be a cliche. I'm sorry. It's going to be. If you're describing things, is it as hot as a frying pan? Yeah, okay, that's, we all understand what that means, but, you're going to write something. Don't write the parts of the book that the reader's going to skip over, or because the problem with these cliches is if they're used in speech or you're talking to somebody, that's fine. But if you're writing, you've got to constantly surprise, engage, and delight the reader. And cliches don't do that. They just sort of like, oh, okay, that's how's a frying pan. That's not interesting. that was not a better way to say that. You got to come up with a more colorful, more interesting way, or don't say it at all. Okay? Rather than have a cliche, don't have them say anything. I can't tell you how many times I get an idea and I got a dialogue sequence in my head, and when I go to write it in prose or write it for comics, and I jettison half the dialogue because it's like there's no reason. The reader's going to skip over this. There's no reason to say this. I'm wasting the reader's time. I'm boring them, and don't bore. People say to me, how do you get your stories up and running so fast? How do you make your characters so interesting and engaging so quickly? And I said it's because it's not talent. It's my dreaded fear of boring the reader. I don't want people to read my stuff and go, oh gosh, I can't even finish this. It's so tiresome. So that's my greatest fear. It's like when you're talking to somebody and you're trying to engage them and they're looking at their watch and they're rolling their eyes and, they're looking over your shoulder to see if there's anybody more interesting to talk to. Well, that's what I'm living through as I'm writing for this invisible audience. I'm writing for you. And I'm thinking, what can I do to keep them interested? And cliches don't do it. They don't hack it. They're no good. They suck. Don't stay away from them. So, Andrew Runyon, when writing a novel series, do you start thinking about the next novel as you're writing the current one, or do you complete and publish the current one before you even think about the next one? Also, did you choose the name Levon for your titular character because it means lion in Hebrew, or because this novel spelled backwards? Probably because of the Elton John song. I was like, Levon. I always thought it was a name that sounds very masculine, and that's what I wanted. And Cade, his last name is because they always say you need that hard consonant in a hero's name somewhere. Levon doesn't have any hard consonants, so I put Cade. Captain Kirk, is all hard consonants. So I didn't know it meant lion in Hebrew. That's pretty cool. I definitely will reference that somewhere. As far as, doing series of novels, am I thinking of the next one? Yeah, I generally am. With Bad Times, I kind of knew where I was going, where I wanted to go next. I definitely knew where I wanted to end the series. Well, not end it, but end the first 6-book arc. I definitely wanted to get the dinosaurs. So I knew where I wanted to go in each book, so I had a general idea so that I could set up, because Bad Times is pretty much a continuation series. It's very much serialized big epic, the first 6 books. So I kind of had to set things up in each book for the next book. So I had to be thinking long term. And so yeah, definitely. Levon, the first... Boy, I'm gonna say the first 5 books are kind of the same way. They're a continuous story. They tell one big story as Levon gets in trouble and he and Mary, his daughter, go on the run. But then as things settle down, as their troubles recede a bit and they return home to Alabama to live, the next few books take place there. And that's where I began to run into the problem of, well, what do we do next? And I didn't want to do a Murder, She Wrote thing where wherever they lived, there was always trouble. There was always somebody being murdered, or the worst cliche of all, I'm going to do a favor for a friend, or my friend got killed. I've got to find out who did it. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to do that. And so with Levon's Prey, I shake the series up quite a bit. someone recently said to me that they liked the Levon books because, unlike a lot of these vigilante justice series, each book of mine is different. You know, the first one's a straight up crime vigilante thriller. The next one is kind of a die-hard thing. The next one is a getaway thing where they're on the run. So I would change up. Each book isn't a rewrite or a remake of the previous book. I tried to make it so it wasn't formulaic. But with Levon, even with Levon, when I as I'm writing it, I realize I'm coming to the end of the usefulness of this particular location or this particular set of supporting characters, and I'm going to have to move on. Otherwise, I'm going to start getting in a rut with these books. And so, don't get comfortable with Levon Cade. Things are going to change drastically, as they always have. I mean, it's a book where everything changed. For the first 6 books, we sort of calmed down a little bit for a couple of novels, even though it's still extraordinarily violent. And you kind of have a 3-book arc there, and then we're going to move on to, even crazier stuff in the 11th book in the series. Another series I'm just beginning really is the Sidewinders. And the first book, Snakehand, is available through Amazon, Kindle, and print, but we're doing a new edition through Castalia House, and there'll be a follow-up novel that's already written, cover's done, and it'll be released shortly after Snakehand, called La Gringa. And I don't know, there's 2 characters I want to do after that, but I'm not sure which ones I want to do first in the series. But it's what the Sidewinders is a shared universe, shared Western universe, but each book presents a new character. And ultimately, kind of the way Marvel set up the Avengers, ultimately in the 5th or 6th book, all these characters will get together, will join in one huge, gigantic Western epic. So big time shoot 'em up. So you can look forward to that, as I can look forward to it. So anyway, that's it for this week. Hey, check out chuckdixon.net. Again, it's free too, just like Arctans. There's lots of cool stuff there. I archived my movie reviews there. A lot of people like the movie reviews. But there's lots of stuff to look at. There's a lot of unpublished comic art. There's entire unpublished graphic novels that you can read online at chuckdixon.net. And it's kind of a cool place to visit. And every once in a while, I'll have a blog about this or that. And you might enjoy it. Well, that's it for me this week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you could spread the word. I'm slowly but surely getting more and more of an audience here, more and more of a subscriber base. And I think I have all of you to thank for that, because you're very kind words and you're talking about this on social media and telling your friends. So if you would please keep doing that, and I will see all of you down the road.